Welcome to another episode of the Build and Scale Boldly podcast. Today we're going to be talking about your first big hire, and we're going to be talking about how to find, grow, and lead your dream executive assistant. Now, today's episode is really going to change the game for you because we're talking about one of the most powerful decisions that you make as a business owner, especially when you're first starting out, which is hiring your executive assistant. Now, some of you may hire a virtual assistant as your first person. Some of you may hire a personal assistant. But even if that's the case, you're going to learn a lot from listening to today's episode, which is really focused on hiring your first executive assistant. Now, if you're serious about scaling your business, you know you're going to need a team. And an executive assistant is a really important person on that team because they're going to help you be a lot more productive. They're going to help protect your energy because you're doing more of what you like to do and what you're good at, and less of those things that kind of can sometimes feel like busy work, right? And not really move the business forward and move the needle forward, but need to happen. Here's the truth. The hiring your executive assistant, as important as it is, I found it to be one of the most challenging hires to actually hire. I myself have gone through 7 executive assistants over the course of just semi-retired MD. If that gives you a sense of how difficult I find this position to be with hiring. So I've done a lot of learning around this position, and that's why I wanted to start out by bringing it to you very early on in this podcast journey. Okay, so let's talk about why hiring your first EA is so important. Well, one of the problems is a lot of entrepreneurs wait too long to hire their first EA. And I could say that definitely is something that I did. I did not really understand who to hire first. I didn't understand the value that an executive assistant could bring. And so I waited way too long to hire an executive assistant. And I was actually reactional when I went to first hire my first assistant. They were not an executive assistant by training. They were more of like a personal assistant. And it was just a person who kind of showed up in front of me. I think a lot of people do that when they're first starting their businesses, right? They hire family members, they hire neighbors. I, in my case, hired a babysitter that was working with our kids. I somehow thought that was going to be a first really great hire for me. It worked out fine. I learned a lot, but ideally you do this a little bit more intentionally and you have a sense of who you need to hire, and you do a lot of this work that we're going to cover in this podcast, so you make sure that you have a greater chance of getting the right fit for you. Now, is this going to guarantee you get the right fit right off the bat? No. I have hired and fired so much in my entrepreneurial journey, and that is just part of what you're going to have to learn how to do. And the person that you interview is not necessarily the person that shows up to work. So sometimes it will not work out. You'll go through all of the stuff I'm going to teach you, and you still have to fire the individual. The key is to get better and better at recognizing faster and faster when you need to let somebody go and when they're not working. And if you can do it within the first 2 weeks of anybody working, a lot of times you already have a sense. That's at least what I found, is within the first 2 weeks I have a sense of if this is going to work. And what I found in my entrepreneurial journey is I keep kind of putting things off, and then we're 3 months in and I'm like, this is just not working. And so follow these kind of structure, look at some of the stuff I'm going to cover today. Ideally, it's going to help you have much better odds of hiring exactly the right fit. But if you don't hire the right fit, hopefully it'll help you figure that out faster so you can move on and find the next person, which may be the right fit. So what are the keys to making sure that you're hiring a great executive assistant, one that's going to just blow you out of the water and be awesome? Well, first of all, you want to create a clear scorecard. So if this is the first time you're thinking about scorecards, I'm just going to cover it in brief. We'll cover it in more detail in another podcast. But a scorecard is really almost like a slide. I actually make it a PowerPoint slide that kind of outlines the job, but it outlines the job in terms of a couple key areas. It outlines outcomes. So outcomes are the results the individual needs to produce in order to be successful at the job. Okay, so I'm going to repeat that again. They're the results the individual needs to do to be successful at the job. So they are not tasks, they are results. And so they're not written like, read my email daily and make sure that I see the right emails. They're written as my email is filtered 3 times a day. So they have to be specific and measurable. My email is filtered 3 times a day, and there's a 50% reduction in the emails I need to read. That is a result the individual is responsible for creating. And that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about outcomes. And so in my businesses, whenever I'm creating a position, I am actually going and creating the outcomes that the position is responsible for producing for that job. Now, why am I doing this? Well, because it gives me clarity on what I want produced for that job. It also helps me identify a salary right? Because if I add a lot of really heavy responsibilities, that's a job that needs to be paid more. And it also allows the person who I'm hiring to have what I would call a yellow brick road of like what success looks like. Because we all want to be successful. We all want to feel successful at our jobs. And if we know objectively with specific measurable outcomes what success looks like, it gives an A player, which is a person who really wants to succeed and wants to get that A on their report card, a real clear path to being successful at that job. And so they should be able to look through the outcomes and say, yes, I'm doing that. I'm doing that. I'm doing that. And if they can do that and they can do it with all of the different outcomes that you've built in the scorecard, then they know that they're doing their job well. The other thing I put in my scorecards are critical drivers. These are the activities that you need to do to be able to get those results. And ideally they're numbers so the person can track it. I think for an executive assistant or any assistant, it's a little bit more challenging. The really big result that they're tracking is my time. As the CEO, my time as their leader, how much of my time are they saving? That's really the most important critical driver that they're kind of producing. It's less so about other numbers, whereas like a marketing head might have a lot more critical drivers. And then specific roles that they're going to play, right? Are they going to be full-time executive assistant to you? Are they going to also do some executive assistant work for somebody else on your team? Are they going to be executive assistant and HR? Like what are their roles going to be? And especially when you're first starting out and you're hiring your first team member, if they're an executive assistant, they're probably going to have to wear multiple hats. And so I would want to lay that out for them. What are the different roles that they're going to have to do? Of course, some of it's going to be executive assistant and personal assistant, but is there going to be other things that you really expect them to be able to do? You want to lay that out in the scorecard. And so the scorecard basically for them is laying out their outcomes or critical drivers in their specific roles. Now, all my scorecards also have my company cultural values in them. I could talk about that another time, but you really want to have a clear vision of the person you're looking for. So when you put that listing out there or when you put that social media post out there looking for the individual that you have a lot of clarity of who you're looking for, and they also can read it and have a little clarity about who your business is, what is your culture of your business, and what does this role really look like? What does success look like in this role? So they can say, yes, I can do that, or no, I can't do that. So then the other thing to let you know is that hiring your EA is not just about hiring a professional. Actually, you're also hiring like somebody who is really truly your right hand. This is the individual who's going to save you so much time, both in the business, but also in your personal life. So I think it's incredibly helpful to have your executive assistant doing a lot of personal stuff for you, because that is the stuff that really, sucks a lot of your time, especially as a female entrepreneur. If you're also a parent, there's probably a billion tasks that you're handling for your kids that you can actually outsource to your executive assistant. Maybe you're also running your household and there are a lot of household tasks. So for my executive assistant, of course, she's doing all kinds of work stuff, but she's also doing a lot of managing of my household. We use Monday.com project management software. And so in Monday.com, there's a whole section on household management, like getting the air conditioners filters cleaned every 3 months, making sure the kids get their flu shots every year, making sure that my house is cleaned. All those things, those are like actually things that my executive assistant is largely scheduling and managing and remembering, hey, by the way, your golf cart needs to have its yearly inspection. So let me schedule that ahead of time for you. That's all in the project management software. So she's doing a lot of those personal things that require a lot of my time normally as a mother and as a household owner, which, no longer do I need to do because she's going to handle a lot of it for me. And so this job is not just about inboxes and calendars. It's not just about scheduling with external stakeholders in your business. This position is also about protecting your highest energy and focus in all aspects of your life. Okay, all aspects, personal life included. Now, one of the things you really want to understand before you're going out and hiring your executive assistant is, what is your personality and what is the personality that's really going to suit this job? And so one of the things that I do is I have a DISC assessment, which is, I will go into detail on this some other time and in a different podcast, but a DISC is a personality test. So I have a DISC assessment for myself. I also have something called Understanding Myself, which I think is really, really helpful for myself. So I have both of those things. And I actually have them publicly available for everyone in my company to be able to see so they can say, hey, I want to understand Laetitia a little bit more. I want to understand what makes her tick. Let me go and look at her personality tests. I also make make sure that I get these personality tests for any executive assistant who I'm interviewing and going through the process with. So what I'll do is the DISC assessment I will get for every single applicant who applies for this position. And then understanding myself, I will do for the top 2 or 3 candidates to really understand them at a greater depth. And one of the cool things about understanding myself is you can have 2 people kind of in the network, and they'll tell you where you may have areas of friction or where you're going to work really well together. So I find that very, very useful. It's useful for the executive assistants also to be able to look and see who they are and see, and this is not like about skill set, this is about energy. What gives you energy? So I could do detail work. It does not energize me. It actually drains me. So I can do it. And what you see is like on my baseline, I have some conscientiousness and detail work. But then when you can see is I get stressed, my conscientious level, like it skyrockets, and I get into the details, I get into the weeds when I get stressed. So those kind of things are really important to understand from the personality tests. And what I do when I'm looking for any new position in my company is I'm really thinking about what personality is going to be most energized by this position. And even before I start the search, I'm like, oh, I really am looking for this type of personality, this one or this one in this position, because they really have to have attention to detail, for example, and they have to be able to get things done, but they also have to be friendly enough to deal with, my air conditioning guys. You need to think about the mix of the individual for any position that you are hiring for. And so that's why I'm always doing these personality tests. Now, one of the other things to understand is fit matters a lot. Fit with your personality matters a lot, sometimes perhaps even more than experience. I have hired so many experienced EAs who have done well, have been in other jobs for many, many years, and they just didn't work out for me. I think part of it is as we have really high standards in our company, we have really high expectations. And honestly, what we say is, hey, this is your job. These are your outcomes. This is your responsibility to do that. It's not our responsibility to motivate you or make sure you're doing your outcomes. It's actually your job to do it. And so I think part of it is people come in from other companies where they maybe weren't held to a high standard and they just don't work out. So you can say, hey, I have this EA or I have this person who served as a chief of staff for 20 years come into your business and they just don't fit. And they don't fit you because they don't fit the culture and they don't fit how you operate and how you like things done, and they may not work out. And so that's definitely one of the challenges in this position is you can hire somebody with all this experience who looks phenomenal on paper, and then in actuality, when they come in, they just don't work, and your expectations are so different from what they actually can deliver. So part of this when you interview is also just, of course, looking at their CV, looking at the personality tests, looking at how you guys interact with each other, but understanding that not all the time are you going to have the right fit. And when you get into the work in a couple weeks, you're going to have a sense of, does this work or does this not work? Now, one of the more important things to think about when you're creating the scorecard and you're thinking about the outcomes is to use that delegate and elevate tool from Entrepreneurial Operating System, EOS, which I mentioned a little bit earlier in a different podcast. Was you look at what you're good at, what you like to do, and then you're looking at all those different sections, and the section of what you're not good at and you don't like to do is a really great one that you're probably going to want to offload. Now, when you're creating your scorecard, you really want to think about that delegate and elevate tool that I mentioned in a previous podcast, which is an entrepreneurial operating system tool, EOS. And what it really looks at is, what do you like to do and you're great at? And then what do you not like to do and you're not great at? And making sure that a lot of those, I'm not good at it and I don't like it, are definitely over there in your outcomes for your EA, because that's a really important one where you can take those things that are draining your energy and move it to another individual who potentially gets actually energized by doing those types of things. And what I often find is my executive assistants really enjoy kind of knocking tasks off the list and getting them done and getting them done well. And these are the detail-oriented tasks that I potentially really don't like to do. They like to organize. They like to organize folders. They like to organize the Monday drives. And this is stuff that I am definitely not energized by at all. Could I do it? Sure. But it's really great to hand that off to them. And so do your delegate and elevate tool and then go in and create some of the outcomes based on that. Another thing I really wanted to cover with executive assistants is doing a daily check-in. And what this allows is this like momentum and this ability to kind of modulate and really learn to work well with each other and actually to communicate things in a much more efficient way sometimes. And so what I do usually is I do a 15 to 30 minute check-in most days with my executive assistant. And what we're talking through is like projects, and she's bringing me things like, okay, these people sent you these emails just for knowledge, for reporting out, or to tell me like, hey, I was going to answer this. Is this okay? And so those daily check-ins, we're kind of checking on statuses. She actually leads them. She's reporting out. She's saying, I have this and this and this and this and this I wanted to inform you about. And then she's also asking me, do you have anything you want me to do? Is there anything on your mind that's important? These daily check-ins allow us to make sure priorities are moving forward. They allow us to see where my EA is stuck. They allow her to get updates from me, like maybe something's changed or something's come up that's really important that I need her to put up front, and it helps us move forward together so we're not just reacting. Now, a really important thing that I've found, email is another one that's really incredible that your EA can really take off of your list. And I have to tell you guys, for a long time, for the first 7 EAs actually, none of them could really help me with my email the way I really needed help. And I have just managed to, in the last couple months, actually find an EA who is able to do my email. And by that, I mean reduce my time spent in my email by about 50%. And there's a whole system behind it. I should probably bring my executive assistant in to talk about how she's doing that. But just know that this is possible, because for a long time I would read, your EA should be able to handle a lot of your emails. And I just didn't quite know if it was actually possible, because I tried over and over and over again. And if you can have your executive assistant reduce your email time by a lot, that actually creates so much more time in your day to really move the needle on other things. Okay, so one question I know a lot of you probably have at this point is like, how much does an executive assistant cost? And how much do I really need to be making in my business to be able to afford an executive assistant? So now what I really mentioned in the beginning is some people will decide to hire a virtual assistant first, or maybe they'll hire a personal assistant. Maybe you'll just hire a household manager, and that's a person who's going to take a lot of the household work off of you. So there are different ways to go depending on your budget for the individual as well. So a virtual assistant, if you're hiring them from like the Philippines or from Mexico, they're probably somewhere in the $6 to $10 range, and you don't have to have a W-2 employee. You're not paying all Social Security tax and all those other costs that you get when you have a U.S. employee. You can certainly hire a U.S. virtual assistant or assistant in general, and that's going to be a cheaper cost, and you can even do that part-time, and maybe they're a 1099, like a contractor. They're not a W-2 employee, and again, you're going to save a lot of money doing that. Maybe that individual, I have actually seen people who have that type of individual, and maybe they're paying them full-time like $45,000 a year, and it's working really, really well. When I went out to hire my first executive assistant, I was probably paying in the $55 to $65K range a year, and this was for a full-time employee. They had some benefits eventually where I started to add in a health retirement account or health receipt account, which actually allowed them to get some health care. And that kind of came down a couple years into my business, my current business, Semi-Retired MD. But over time, I have found that I've actually shifted to pay more and more to really get a high caliber executive assistant. And so I will say that I'm paying significantly more than that now to be able to have that individual who has a ton of experience in training. But again, it's not just the training, it's how they think, it's how proactive they are, it's how they lead themselves, it's how they take true ownership over those outcomes that really sets them apart from a lot of the other executive assistants that I've had in the past. Now, if you're hiring a virtual assistant, from another country, I would really start with tasks per se and like lay things out and have SOPs for everything and make it really, really clear. They're going to require a lot more oversight than maybe you bringing in somebody who has 10 years of experience as an executive assistant and very much knows what they're doing, understands the culture, and is really very proactive. So there's also you have to understand there's also a certain amount of time you're going to have to spend with each individual, and that time may be that you actually spend more time with the people that are cheaper per hour, and that's got a cost to it as well, right? And so you just kind of have to keep that in mind. Now, one of the things I really want to encourage you to do is to think about growing your EA into a strategic partner over time. And this is just with the advent of more and more AI. A lot of executive assistant work in the next 5 years is going to become easier and easier with AI. And honestly, AI might be able to do a lot of the tasks that you initially start your EA out doing. And so you want to be able to have an EA who's growing, who's seeing what the future is, who's learning the new technologies, and that will allow your EA to be more and more efficient over time. Over time, they can become more of a strategic partner. They can maybe take on other tasks that they didn't have originally on their list, because AI has made their other things so efficient or actually eliminated some of the things they used to do. And so just think as the next few years progress with AI, that your executive assistant and what they do for you is going to change probably fairly dramatically, and just to be aware of that. And so for me, what I'm really looking for is somebody who can lead themselves, somebody who's proactive, somebody who's a really great thinker. I actually call it radical common sense. Somebody who has radical common sense. And I'm investing in making sure that they're learning AI and that they're learning different ways of doing things, because I want them to be able to grow with the position as some of the other things get taken off and AI is able to handle them, because I want to keep my executive assistant long term. And so she's going to have to grow, and she's going to have to be a lifelong learner to be able to have a full plate of activities to do 5 years from now. Now, some of you have been listening to this and you're like, oh, I'm ready to hire my EA. But there are a lot of things that you still need to know, a lot of steps, a lot of details that I've not laid out fully in this podcast just because of limitation of time. And so if you want to make this hiring process a whole lot easier, one thing I wanted to make sure you guys knew about is we have a free download called the Less Stress and More Success Hiring System. It's a free guide that helps you learn to add team members, any team member actually. And so if you're struggling with, like, let's say a clinic manager, for example, this would actually help you think through that as well. And it covers a lot of the things that I was talking about, outcomes, things like that. And it really is going to help you know the exact steps to make smarter, more confident hires, all without having as much overwhelm. And I remember when I first started out, I had no idea what to do. And the first person I hired for this kind of assistant role, I actually tried to get them to hire my whole team for me, because this is one of those areas that I was so scared of when I was a new entrepreneur and felt like I didn't know anything and felt like I was going to screw up, that I actually abdicated responsibility here. And it was a terrible area to abdicate responsibility. You know, I run multi-million-dollar businesses and I'm still intricately involved in hiring, because building your team is one of those CEO jobs that you cannot delegate. I mean, you can delegate pieces of it, but building the team and having the right team and creating the culture, that's a CEO role that you're always going to have a piece of. And so this is not one area that you want to say, oh, I'm overwhelmed, I don't know what I'm doing, and just abdicate. This is something you want to learn. And that guide, that Less Stress and More Success Hiring System, will help you be able to really learn what you need to know to be able to go and start hiring and make a lot less mistakes hiring. It's something I wish I had when I first started out. So you can find that at biara.com/hiring systems, buildandscaleboldly.com. Okay, so it's the hiring systems part that you're going to want to do. You can also find it if you just go to biara.com, BEYARA.com. You kind of scale down the first page, you'll see it in there as a free download. And that's what you're really going to want to do if you want to grow your team and learn a lot of the systems and processes that I'm talking about that I've built over time, over hiring well over 40, 50 people now at this point. It's a really helpful guide that will give you a lot of actionable insights that you can use to actually start applying and hiring the right individual for you today, with whatever position it is, whether it's EA or something else. So now just reflecting back on our question, right? I try to end every podcast with a kind of a bold question for you to think about. And again, you can always write to us at hello@biara.com and just kind of share your thoughts, or you could put them into a review of this podcast. But it's, you know, if you already have an EA, what's one thing you can do to empower that EA even more, to be able to take on additional tasks, take on additional responsibilities, or grow knowing that AI is going to change things, 5 years from now, or even 1 year from now, honestly. And if you don't have an EA yet, or a virtual assistant or household manager, what's one task today that you really could delegate that will free up several hours, let's say, of a week of work for you? And what kind of individual would take over that task? And how much would they cost versus how much per hour your value is actually worth? That's really your reflection question. Now, Thanks for tuning into the podcast, the Build and Scale Boldly podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, I'd love for you to subscribe to this show and then also share it with somebody else you know, somebody else who's a female physician entrepreneur or just an entrepreneur who's building their business and wants to do so more boldly, and they want to scale and they want to grow and they want to have more impact. These are the people who will benefit from this podcast. And then don't forget to grab your free copy of the Less Stress and More Success Hiring System. It's free for you, and it'll really help you become better at hiring, and has a lot of my experience, a lot of reading and learning over the years that I've really put into it. Keep dreaming big, keep leading boldly, and most of all, keep building the business and life you love. We'll see you next time.